Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. And today we're going to talk about something really important that can be affecting a number of people around the world, especially when we're all being asked to isolate at home. Now, what happens if you're at home and there is domestic violence happening, or there is arguments happen that escalate to a particular level, and they hadn't before, but maybe the stresses are causing that, and all of a sudden we're in a situation where we're locked inside our house with somebody that's being abusive. So some people have experienced this before lockdown. Some people may experience it during lockdown. Today I have with me Janine Lee. Hi, welcome, Janine.
Hi, Tim. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
You're welcome. Now, you've got a distinctly Kiwi-ish accent, but I think you're on the Sunshine Coast. Is that right?
Absolutely, you've got it correctly. So I moved across from New Zealand a couple of years ago, and absolutely love being here in Queensland. It's wonderful.
Now, I have watched Frozen 2, which I believe was shot on set in New Zealand, where the entire thing was in a cloud. So I believe it's possibly you came over to the Sunshine Coast purely because of the word sunshine in it. Was that the reason?
I sure did, but I wasn't expecting the humidity, and now I'm going. But look, it's just beautiful here. The weather, and certainly can't complain. It's a great place to be, and I'm very blessed that I can work virtually and remotely. So chose the best place to stay.
You did have to leave behind a pretty amazing prime minister to do it, but thank you for your sacrifice. Now you were talking about you get to work remotely. What work do you do? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, certainly. What I'm doing at the moment is we've set up a business for good, and it's about really working with privately with professionals and corporate leaders around reducing domestic violence, both at home and work, to make sure that people really feel safer and be safer so they can live their best lives.
Okay, so what's your background in domestic violence?
I've worked in this area for just over 25 years now, and it's been a really interesting background for me. So 23 years of that was as a sworn police officer in the New Zealand Police. And most people say, gosh, you don't look like a police officer. How did you survive for 23 years in the police? So I worked across different teams and worked from anything from responding to emergency jobs on the ground for a number of years through to I was a detective and from 2004 onwards. So worked over a decade on homicides and drug cases and aggravated robberies, serious assaults and so forth. And then led community policing teams in some really challenging areas. Led domestic violence investigation teams, and then lastly I was working on the at a national level at Police National Headquarters, and we were leading the domestic violence and it was called family violence over there, the national family violence team across New Zealand. So working a bit of cross government and implementing policy, operationalising policy, reviewing it, and being the real national mentor leaders for New Zealand for police projects. So it's been a very interesting time.
Wow. I mean, that's okay. So I just need to look up how to spell credibility because, or in your case, it would be credibility. So you've certainly got the street cred. You've got credibility.
The street cred.
My goodness. I kind of want to talk about all of that, but I guess it does definitely tie into what you're doing now. Now, you did also mention, so I have in my mind an idea of the whole domestic violence thing, and we will talk a little bit about how people being housed up in isolation now because of this virus can exacerbate that or can certainly reveal that as a troubling area in families. But you did also mention you work with leaders about how to tackle this at work. Now, are you saying that the violence happens at work as well, or how they deal with their people who are going through violence at home how they deal with them at work, or a bit of both?
Both. It's both. And now with COVID, Tim, one of the biggest things that I'm seeing, and I'm really, really trying to get discussions going, is because traditionally, when I was at Police National Headquarters, what I saw was there was a really big gap. Like, most people who are impacted by domestic and family violence are working. And so what I know is that the violence moves into the workplace when they're at work, and it presents in many different ways, because they may end up with, for example, 50 phone calls in an hour at work, or 50 messages, up to 100 messages, and it's the stalking and harassment, or our partner may bring us lunch, for example, and they're perceived to be this wonderful partner, and yet what they're doing is they're checking up on us and really monitoring our movements, who we're having meetings with, and so forth. So it really does creep into the workplace in so many different aspects. And the interesting thing now, Tim, is now that with COVID-19, how our workplaces, we're all transitioning to working at home. So the lens that I want to put over this with employers to really help them not only protect their employees in terms of what's safe, but also in terms of reputational brand and litigation moving forward, because suddenly employers traditionally they've said, look, what happens at home is none of my business. We're interested in what's happening in the workplace. But now our workplaces are our homes, and the two is intertwining. And so there's a real risk there now that needs to be managed, because when abuse, and it doesn't have to be physical abuse, but any type of abuse is happening in the home whilst someone's at work, whether they are the employee or a family member, we now have occupational violence in the workplace, and there's a real duty of care there for employers to step up and have the right frameworks in place to be able to actively manage that, to actually not only protect themselves but also rightly the employee and family members as well.
Hmm. In New Zealand or in Australia, what if somebody's working from home and violence is happening there? Is there a duty of care to the employer because of telecommuting makes home a workplace?
So in Australia, Safe Work have now come out under their and updated their COVID-19 website, and they have said under the definition of psychological safety that domestic and family violence, isolation, different work pressures, whether it's increased pressure or a lesser pressure, these are all new possible risks that employers need to manage under workhouse safety. So really no different to how we need to manage or prevent someone from slipping on a mat, or if we've got something spilt in the workplace, we need to manage it. So they've now recognised that. And last year, Fair Work Commission in Australia came out and now have provide all employees with entitlements around taking domestic and family violence leave if they need to. So it's really important now for employers to understand what that looks like in reality. So if someone's working from home now and they need to take domestic and family violence leave all of a sudden, because it's never something we can plan, then how do they practically take that? Who do they tell? What's the framework that's been put in place with employers? Because unless that's there, then that's when potentially there can be issues later on down the track in terms of how that's been communicated, the consultation with employees and so forth.